This is a dramatization. My name is Eleanor Sinclair, and for 10 years I was the dutiful daughter-in-law, the quiet wife, the woman who traded a promising career as a museum archivist for the privilege of becoming a Pemberton. In the polished mahogany boardroom of Caldwell & Associates, I sat across from the two people who had systematically erased me, my husband, Richard, and his mother, Lydia Ashworth. Lydia smiled. It was a thin, predatory expression that didn't touch her perfectly placid blue eyes. She reached across the gleaming table and patted my hand, her rings cold against my skin. "It's for the best, dear. Walter wouldn't have wanted a protracted, messy affair." The affair was the reading of her husband's will. My father-in-law, Walter Pemberton, had passed away 2 weeks prior. He was the only one in the family who had ever looked at me and seen a person rather than an accessory. Mr. Caldwell, a man whose face seemed permanently etched with the solemnity of his profession, cleared his throat. He held a crisp, cream-colored document. As per Walter Pemberton's last will and testament, dated March 12th of this year. Lydia's smile widened. March 12th. I knew that date. That was the day Walter had been rushed to the hospital after a fall, the day his lucidity began to wane like a flickering candle. Mr. Caldwell read on. The Pemberton estate, the sprawling Tudor-style house, the stock portfolio, the art collection, all of it was to be divided between his beloved wife, Lydia, and devoted son, Richard. My husband shifted beside me, a puppet unable to even look in my direction. He was his mother's son through and through. Then came my part. And to my daughter-in-law, Eleanor Sinclair, for her years of companionship, I bequeath the sum of $25,000 and my sincere hope that she finds a new path for herself. A new path. It was Lydia's language, sanitized by a lawyer. It was a severance package, a dismissal. $25,000 for 10 years of my life, for giving up my work, my apartment in the city, my independence, for nursing Walter through his final years while his own wife planned charity galas and his son played golf. Lydia squeezed my hand again, a gesture of faux sympathy that was really a spike of triumph. "There, you see," she whispered, her voice a venomous honey. "He provided for you, more than generous." I didn't flinch. I didn't cry. I simply met her gaze and held it. She didn't know that the woman sitting across from her, the quiet little archivist she'd dismissed as a footnote, had already rewritten the ending. Mr. Caldwell placed the will on the table. Richard let out a sigh of relief. It was over. They had won. "Thank you, Mr. Caldwell," Lydia said, already rising, the Queen dismissing her court. "We appreciate your efficiency." "Please sit down, Mrs. Ashworth," the lawyer said, his voice suddenly firm. He didn't look at her. He looked at me. "We are not quite finished." He reached into his leather briefcase and pulled out a second envelope. It was not cream-colored and crisp. It was a long, pale blue business envelope, slightly worn at the edges, sealed with a familiar blob of dark red wax. Lydia's perfectly sculpted face went white. The smile vanished, replaced by a flicker of pure, unadulterated panic. She knew that envelope, and she knew what it meant. I had married into the Pemberton family, believing it was a partnership. Richard was charming, handsome, and seemed to admire my passion for history. I was a senior archivist at the city's historical society, a job I adored. I spent my days with forgotten letters, faded photographs, and the tangible ghosts of the past. Richard's father, Walter, was a renowned collector of historical documents, and we bonded over that instantly. Lydia, however, saw me as an unfortunate acquisition. "An archivist?" she'd said when we were first introduced, drawing the word out as if it tasted foul. How quaint. "Do you just file things all day, dear?" For the first few years, I tried. I hosted dinners, volunteered for her charities, and learned to navigate the shark-infested waters of her social circle. But it was never enough. I wasn't old money. My parents were teachers, not titans of industry. To Lydia, I was a permanent stain on the Pemberton legacy. She began a quiet, insidious campaign to diminish me. She'd forget to invite me to family events, then feign shock when Richard arrived alone. She'd compliment my dress, then whisper to a friend just loudly enough for me to hear, "It's a valiant effort for what she can afford." Richard, to his eternal shame, did nothing. "That's just how Mother is," he'd say. "Don't take it personally." The real erosion began when Walter's health started to fail. He was diagnosed with a progressive neurological condition. "Eleanor, you're so good with him," Lydia cooed one afternoon, "and since you're not busy with a career anymore, perhaps you could oversee his care. It would be such a help." I had quit my job a year prior at her suggestion to focus on the family. It was a trap, and I had walked right into it. My days became a cycle of nurse schedules, medication logs, and doctor's appointments. My world shrank to the four walls of the Pemberton estate. Lydia used my devotion to her husband as a weapon, painting me as the live-in help while she maintained her glittering social life. My bank account, once my own, was now a joint account with Richard from which he would transfer a monthly allowance. He and his mother controlled everything. I was a guest in my own life. Hit subscribe if you believe that silence can be a weapon. Comment your city and share this with someone who's been underestimated. The breaking point wasn't some grand, dramatic betrayal. It was a small, quiet cruelty. It was my 35th birthday. Lydia and Richard took me to dinner at a painfully expensive restaurant. At the end of the meal, Lydia slid a small, elegantly wrapped box across the table. Inside was a silver locket. "From the Pemberton collection," she announced. "It's not one of the important pieces, of course, but I thought you should have something. Second-hand, a cast-off." I thanked her, my voice tight. Later that evening, back at the house, I was looking for an aspirin in Richard's study when I saw his laptop open. A document was on the screen. It was a list titled Lydia's Notes, W.P. Will. My blood ran cold. I scanned the lines. It was a meticulous breakdown of the Pemberton assets, with cold calculations for how they should be distributed. And there, near the bottom, was a line item. Eleanor. Token sum, $25,000. Phrase as, "for her service." Ensures no contest. I felt the air leave my lungs. This wasn't just Lydia. Richard was her accomplice. They were drafting my exit right under my nose, while I was upstairs reading to their dying patriarch. The locket wasn't a gift. It was a prelude to a payoff. In that moment, the wounded, diminished wife died, and the archivist was reborn. I didn't confront them. I closed the laptop, went upstairs, and looked at myself in the mirror. The hurt was a physical thing, a stone in my chest. But beneath it, something else was stirring. A cold, quiet anger, an archivist's instinct. You don't get angry at a forgery. You document it, you analyze it, you expose it with the truth. My investigation began in Walter's library. He had spent his last coherent months with me there, surrounded by his beloved books and documents. He was often confused, but his love for history remained sharp. He'd have me retrieve old letters, deeds, and manuscripts. "Test your skills, Eleanor," he'd rasp, a twinkle in his tired eyes. "Tell me about this one." He'd hand me a letter from the 19th century, and I'd talk him through the paper composition, the type of ink, the style of the handwriting. It was a game we played. But after seeing that document on Richard's laptop, I started looking at everything differently. I realized Walter wasn't just playing a game. He was teaching me. He was preparing me. One afternoon, about a month before he passed, he was more lucid than usual. He pointed to a heavy, leather-bound volume on a high shelf. It was a first edition of Marcus Aurelius's Meditations. "That one, Eleanor," he said, his voice urgent. "It's important, keep it safe, for when you need to remember what is true." I took the book down and promised I would. It felt significant, but I didn't understand why. Not yet. My first real discovery came a week later. I was tidying Walter's desk and found a stray sheet of his personal, watermarked stationery. Tucked beneath it was a piece of cream-colored paper, identical to the one Mr. Caldwell would later hold. On it, in what looked like Walter's shaky handwriting, was a practice signature, Walter Pemberton, over and over. But something was wrong. An archivist develops a feel for these things, an instinct for the rhythm of a person's hand. Walter's signature, weakened by his illness, had a specific tremor, a slight drag on the final loop of the N. These practice signatures were close, but they were too perfect, too studied. They were the work of someone copying, not writing. I photographed the sheet with my phone and hid the original. This was my first piece of evidence. The hidden skill Lydia had mocked for years, my quaint little job, was about to become her undoing. An archivist doesn't just file things. We authenticate. We trace provenance. We uncover the truth hidden in paper and ink. If you're enjoying this story, hit that hype button right now. It's free, takes a second, and helps this video reach more people who need to see it. Now back to the story. I started my own secret archive. Every suspicious document, every overheard conversation, every financial statement Richard tried to hide from me, I documented it all. I used my old university credentials to access academic databases, researching paper manufacturing and ink composition. I learned that the specific watermark on Walter's official stationery was from a small family-owned mill in Scotland that had closed in 2018. Any document on paper made after that date couldn't be from him. I lived a double life. To Lydia and Richard, I was the grieving, compliant widow-in-waiting, drifting through the house like a ghost. I played my part perfectly. I was quiet at dinner. I nodded when Lydia made her cruel, passive-aggressive remarks. I let Richard pat my shoulder with patronizing sympathy. They saw what they wanted to see. A woman already defeated. Meanwhile, in the dead of night, I was in the library, a modern-day detective in a house of secrets. I used a magnifying lamp and a digital microscope I ordered online to examine the practice signatures. I cross-referenced them with dozens of Walter's authenticated letters from before his illness. The forgery was good, but it wasn't perfect. Under magnification, I could see the hesitation marks, the unnatural pressure points where the forger had paused to steady their hand. The true breakthrough came from Walter's gift, the copy of Meditations. Remembering his urgent words, I finally examined the book not as a reader, but as an archivist. The binding was tight, the pages pristine. But as I ran my fingers along the inside cover, I felt it, a subtle thickness, a slight give. The front and back paste downs, the decorative paper glued to the inside of the covers, were not original. Someone had carefully lifted them and replaced them. My heart hammered in my chest. Using a specialized thin palette knife from my old archival toolkit, I spent 2 painstaking hours gently softening the glue and lifting the front paste down. And there it was. Tucked into a hollowed-out compartment in the bookboard was the pale blue envelope. It was addressed to me in Walter's familiar, strong script from years ago. Inside were 2 things. The first was a single-page, handwritten letter. "My dearest Eleanor," it began. "If you are reading this, it means my fears have come to pass. I know my wife. I know her greed. And I know she will try to write her own ending to my story, one that erases you. She has always underestimated you, and in that, you will find your strength. The will she creates will be a forgery. She is careless. She thinks of money, not history. She will not know about the paper or the ink. She will not understand that a signature is a story in itself. Use the skills I have so admired in you. The truth is your shield and your sword. The document with this letter is my true last will and testament. I have lodged a copy with Mr. Caldwell, with instructions that it is only to be brought forth if you, and only you, present him with this original and explain its provenance. He is an honorable man. He will respect my wishes. You were the daughter I never had. You saw the man, not the money. Do not let them take that from you. Build something good. Build something that lasts. Yours, Walter. Tears streamed down my face as I read his words. It wasn't grief for what I had lost, but gratitude for what I had been given, a mission, and the tools to complete it. The second document in the envelope was the will itself, written on his old watermarked stationery, dated 5 years prior, long before his illness, his signature firm and clear. It was witnessed by 2 of his old university friends, both since deceased. I now had the forgery and the authentic article. I had the motive. I had the means. All I needed was the stage. Lydia, in her arrogance, would provide it for me. She escalated her cruelty in the final weeks, convinced of her impending victory. She started talking about redecorating the library, turning it into a more modern media room. She told Richard, in my presence, that it was probably time to sell my car, since I wouldn't be needing it for much longer. Each jab was another nail in her own coffin. I just smiled my quiet, defeated smile and waited for the call from Mr. Caldwell's office. If Sweet Retribution has become part of your week, consider joining the channel membership. Just a couple bucks a month keeps these stories coming. Links below, and hit that hype button if you haven't already. Now back to the story. And so we found ourselves in that boardroom. The trap sprung. Lydia's face was a mask of confusion and fury as Mr. Caldwell placed the pale blue envelope on the table. "What is that?" she demanded, her voice sharp. "This," Mr. Caldwell said, his tone leaving no room for argument, "is another matter pertaining to Mr. Pemberton's estate. It was delivered to me this morning by Mrs. Sinclair, along with a rather thorough analysis." He slid his gaze to me. It was my cue. I leaned forward, my hands folded calmly on the table. The meek, grieving widow was gone. "Lydia," I said, my voice even and clear, "you've always been a woman of grand gestures. Forging a will seems right on brand for you." Richard gasped. "Eleanor, how dare you?" Lydia recovered quickly, her expression hardening into one of cold fury. "This is absurd. Mr. Caldwell, my husband was very ill. This woman is clearly delusional, trying to get more money." "The will you submitted," I interrupted, my voice cutting through her tirade, "the one dated March 12th, is a forgery. A very clumsy one, I might add." I opened my briefcase and took out a slim folder. I slid a document across the table. It was a forensic report from a paper historian I had consulted, a former colleague from my museum days. "The cream-colored paper of your will," I explained, "is from the Regency line by the Brand Crane & Company. A lovely choice. Very elegant. Unfortunately for you, they didn't introduce that specific line with its unique fiber composition until late last year. Walter was already in residential care by then and hadn't signed a single document in months. He certainly didn't sign a will on paper that was, for all intents and purposes, from the future." Lydia stared at the report, her mouth opening and closing silently. "And the ink," I continued, pressing my advantage. "You used a modern gel pen, very smooth, but the ink contains a pigment, phthalocyanine blue BN, that leaves a specific spectral signature. Walter, as you know, was a traditionalist. He used one pen, and one pen only, for his official correspondence, a 1948 Parker 51, filled with Parker Quink black ink. The signatures are chemically incompatible." Richard looked from the report to his mother, his face pale with dawning horror. "Mother, what did you do?" "She practiced," I said, sliding another photograph across the table. It was the picture of the practice signatures I had found. "She practiced his signature until she got it close enough, but she couldn't replicate the tremor in his hand, the one caused by his illness. Instead, she created a signature with hesitation marks, the signature of a forger, not a dying man." Lydia slammed her hand on the table. "This is slander. Lies. My husband loved me. He would never—" "He knew you," I said, my voice dropping. "He knew you better than you thought." I nodded to Mr. Caldwell. The lawyer picked up the blue envelope. Mr. Pemberton lodged a copy of his real will with my father, the firm's founder, 5 years ago. He stipulated that it was only to be considered his final testament if the original was presented by Eleanor Sinclair herself, as proof that she had uncovered the expected fraud. He broke the wax seal with a decisive crack. "This is that original, and this," he said, holding up the single sheet of paper, "is the true last will and testament of Walter Pemberton." He began to read. The language was Walter's, full of warmth and conviction. He left small, sentimental items to old friends. He left a generous but conditional trust to Richard. The condition was that Richard had to get a full-time job and sever all financial ties with his mother. If he failed to do so within 1 year, the trust would be dissolved. And then came the final devastating blow. "As for my wife, Lydia Ashworth," Mr. Caldwell read, his voice resonating with the weight of Walter's words, "whose avarice and vanity have been a source of profound disappointment to me, I leave her nothing. May she find, in the absence of my fortune, the character she has so long neglected." The room was utterly silent. Lydia's face had collapsed. The mask of aristocratic poise was gone, replaced by the raw, ugly face of greed and defeat. "And finally," Mr. Caldwell concluded, "the remainder of my estate, including the house, the portfolio, and all collections, is to be used to establish the Pemberton Foundation for historical preservation. Its purpose will be to acquire, archive, and protect historical documents for public study. Its sole executor and director, with full control over all assets, will be my dear daughter-in-law, Eleanor Sinclair. I trust her integrity, her passion, and her judgment implicitly." I looked at Lydia. The woman who had tried to erase me, to turn me into a footnote, was now the one who had been written out of history. Her power, built on a foundation of money and lies, had crumbled to dust in the space of 5 minutes. "You!" she hissed, her voice a strangled whisper. "You did this." "No," I said, my voice calm and steady. "You did. Walter just made sure I had the tools to prove it." I stood up, collecting my folder. "Mr. Caldwell, I imagine the district attorney's office will be interested in a case of probate fraud." The lawyer nodded grimly. "I've already made the call." Lydia let out a sound somewhere between a sob and a scream as security was called. Richard just sat there, staring at the polished table, a man untethered from the only 2 forces that had ever guided his life, his mother's will and his father's money. He was finally, terrifyingly, on his own. Thank you for watching this story about a woman whose quiet skills were her greatest weapon, and a family that learned the hard way that truth can't be forged. Family betrayal cuts deep, but you don't have to face it alone. Support exists. Sometimes the strongest thing you can do is document the truth and wait for the right moment. Subscribe to Sweet Retribution, hit that hype button to boost this video, and if you want to support what we do, the membership link is below. Share this with everyone who needs to remember that the truth doesn't need to shout. It's been a year since that day in the lawyer's office. Lydia, facing irrefutable evidence, pleaded guilty to fraud and forgery. She received a suspended sentence and crippling fines, but her real punishment was social exile. The world she had so carefully cultivated turned its back on her overnight. Her name was poison. Richard, stripped of his inheritance and his mother's influence, floundered. He tried to reconcile with me, sending pleading emails filled with regret. I never responded. Some betrayals are too deep to mend. I heard he eventually moved to another state and took a sales job. For the first time in his life, he was just a man, no longer a Pemberton. As for me, I moved out of the grand, lonely Pemberton estate and into a bright apartment in the city, just a few blocks from my old life. The house itself became the headquarters of the Pemberton Foundation. I hired a small, passionate team of fellow archivists and historians. The library, which Lydia had wanted to gut, is now our main research center. its shelves filled with priceless documents we are preserving for generations to come. I am no longer Eleanor Sinclair, the quiet footnote. I am Director Sinclair. My name is on the letterhead. My work has meaning. I am surrounded by history, by truth, by people who see me for who I am. Last week, I was overseeing the acquisition of a collection of Civil War letters. As I held one, feeling the delicate, fibrous paper, I thought of Walter. I thought of his quiet faith in me. He didn't just leave me a fortune. He gave me back my life, rebuilt on a foundation of purpose. Lydia once sneered that I would never be more than a footnote in the Pemberton family history. She called me a footnote. She never realized footnotes are where you find the truth.